Hi, this is Corey Johnston, and today's lesson is going to come from the 12th chapter of the first book of Corinthians. Now, throughout the New Testament, the assembly or church is referred to by various analogies, but the most extensive treatment of the body of the Messiah is in this passage, beginning in the 12th through the 27th verse. And we have to understand the context in which it was delivered. Now, the Corinthians, they had an abundance of spiritual gift. There was no shortage of spiritually gifted people. However, the gifts were not, they had the resources, but they weren't properly utilizing them. So they had the resources, but lacked the resourcefulness to realize the potential of each individual's spiritual gifts, which are found in the whole. They were aligning themselves into various factions around disparate preachers, and there was the influx of super apostles, which Paul addresses throughout the letters. So the purpose for which this was written was to address present struggle in a historical context, which is applicable to posterity. But we just want to appreciate the historical context in which it was given in order to make for a more enriching application. Now, the 12th verse reads, "For as the body is one and has many members, but all the members of that one body, being many, are one body, so also is the Messiah." Now, a bodily appendage, such as, for instance, a finger, is useless and unable to perform the indispensable function that it was designed to do apart from the hand to which it is connected, which is connected to the arm, which is connected to the torso. So our various bodily parts are only realized, and their function can only be performed in the collective. So we do ourselves a disservice when we elevate any individual member apart from or above from the collective whole. "For indeed, by one Spirit we were all baptized into one body, whether Jew or Greek, whether slaves or free, and we were all made to drink into one Spirit." So the gospel is the great equalizer. It observes no cultural, racial, gender, or socioeconomic barriers, restrictions, or exclusions. It liberates the slave and humbles the ruler. So he's reminding them his focus is on unity, and unity is to be paramount in any organization, and the assembly is no exception. So he reminds them that they were all baptized into the same body. In spite of the fact that it had splintered into various factions, they remained under one assembly. And "For indeed, the body is not one member, but many." Again, this is just to reiterate, any bodily appendage cannot perform the function it was designed to do apart from the collective whole. "If the foot says, 'Because I am not a hand, I do not belong to the body,' does it therefore not belong to the body? And if the ear says, 'Because I am not an eye, I do not belong to the body,' does it therefore not belong to the body?" Now, feet and ears and other bodily appendage cannot literally speak, so he's imagining if they could speak what they might say, and I feel I'm ultimately expressing what is obvious and needs no further extrapolation. But for any bodily function to perform, it's functionally incompetent to serve in an equivalent capacity as any other. So the foot cannot perform the function of the hand, and the ear cannot perform the function of the eye. Now, every believer has at least one spiritual gift, and these ultimately overlap. Some believers have more than one, but everyone has one, and they're to perform the function that they were designed to do. Now, this is not to suggest that we do not experiment in other spiritual giftedness, because we cannot know what we have, the blessings that we have, and the blessings that we can give unless we try it out. So that's just something to keep in mind. "If all the body was an eye, where would be the hearing? If all hearing, where would be the smelling?" So this is, we have 5 sensory observations, or 5 body parts which perform the sensory capacities, and they all can uniquely provide that indispensable service for which we are to function in this physical world. "But now Elohim has put the members, each one of them, in the body as he pleased." So our body is the product of a wise design, and the complexity of our circular cardiovascular system and our circular system really point to an omniscient architect, but that's ultimately deviating from the crux of the message I should be communicating. And that is that again, to reiterate, that each bodily member and each individual congregant has a unique and indispensable role to play in the collective capacity. And now there are indeed many members, but one body. So the more members that we have, we still remain a collective. The more we expand, the more membership roles we accumulate, we cannot do so without remaining a collective. And the challenges of accumulating more membership is that the potential for faction is there where it wouldn't be with lesser members. And many churches today are oriented towards growth, and I feel this is ultimately a perversion. And I wouldn't trust a mega church simply because the larger the crowd, the more of the world seeps in. So you're really exposing yourself to more of the world and the larger crowd. And an eye is unable to say to the hand, I have no need of you. Or again, the head to the feet, I have no need of you. Again, these bodily parts cannot literally speak, but if they could, they wouldn't distance themselves apart from each other, because whether they know it or not, again, bodily parts don't have thinking capacities. They're all controlled by the brain. But they would realize that apart from the collective whole, they are nothing and useless. But much rather, those members of the body which are thought to be weaker are necessary. And at various locations in the Pauline epistles, Romans 14 springs to mind. He addresses the how weaker believers and spiritually stronger believers are interact with each other in the assembly, because even though the weaker members, which are perhaps analogous to the toes or the fingers, they still serve an indispensable function, and we neglect them at their own peril, and we are to utilize, no matter how small or infinitesimal your gift may be, it is part of something, it belongs to something which is greater than itself. So never lose sight of that, never sell yourself short, never hold back from offering or contributing. And to those of the body which we think to be less respected, these we present greater respect, and are inelegant have greater comeliness. So the appendix, for example, has no identifiable a vital function to perform, yet it is still connected to the body, and that's something we're bound to question the use of. But even those of which we rely on every day, we literally can't make it a single day without without using any part of our body. And even so we really have to not diminish the seemingly small and insignificant contributions to the collective. And whereas our comely have no need, but Elohim blended together the body, having given greater respect to that which lacks it. So our function and the fulfillment of our function is really to be realized when we respect each of the various members in their respective contributions. And we are inclined to overlook a lot of our bodily parts aren't necessarily as glamorous as others, but they are all equally indispensable. And an artist may value their eyes, whereas a musician is going to value their ears. But every bodily part to every individual is equally indispensable. We literally cannot survive without each one. And that there should be no division in the body, but that the members should have the same concern one for another. Now, bodily members and parts cannot express emotion or have concern, but analogously, believers, we are to be concerned for those in our midst, those we walk among, those we worship, those who we fellowship with. We are to be concerned for their welfare, temporal and spiritual, and we are to help utilize their gifts, and to realize their gifts. Now, every single believer has at least one spiritual gift, and it is incumbent upon them to discover that. And the fact is that the preaching is a gift which is more limited amongst the various members. Now, various assemblies have a preacher who is able to motivate the audience in mass, but the gift of helps, which is seemingly less significant yet more commonplace, is equally essential to the preaching. So it's one thing it's all well and good to motivate an audience in mass, but what about throughout the week as we take the church into our world? Because wherever we go, there too the church is also. So we are to never diminish the work of helps. These are the seemingly insignificant, friendly gestures that collectively can brighten someone's day up. And there's really no such thing as a small spiritual gift or contribution, because you could be making someone's day, and it can have a butterfly effect. And consistently cultivating the gifts can develop them to their fullness. So we are to never neglect or diminish or disrespect any member's respective contributions or offerings. And if one member suffers, all the members suffer with it. Or if one member is esteemed, all the members rejoice with it. Now, the sensation of pleasure and pain, for example, if our arm is broken, our entire being or thought process is going to be revolving around the pain, which is located in the arm, yet the entire person is affected. So it's really, and similarly with pleasure. Now, for example, in the act of coitus or sex, the penis or vagina is the center of the pleasure, but the entire body is pleasured through the act. So we are to be similarly minded now when we are to exercise empathy to enter into the emotions of others in our midst. And this isn't a natural condition, but it is a supernatural process through which we are able to accurately identify or imagine the thoughts and emotions of others, and to rejoice with them and to weep with them. And we are to do this with the assembly and with the world, because our ultimate aim is to church the world, and we cannot do that without empathizing with them. And you are a body of Messiah, and members individually. So we are never to lose sight of the individual or the collective when focusing on either of them. And this is ultimately now the collective is comprised of individuals, and we are not to lose sight of the individuals in our midst, but we all must be similarly minded towards the collective beneficial. And we're just going to close with the 12th chapter because we ultimately have a little more time than we anticipated. And Elohim has appointed these in the assembly: firstly apostles, secondly prophets, thirdly teachers, after that miracles, then gifts of healings, helps, ministrations, kinds of tongues. Now these are a laundry list of the various gifts, and apostles was what Paul was. These were visible witnesses of the of the Savior. Paul's witness was of him in resurrected form. As far as we know, he never interacted with him while he ministered in his mortal ministry. And prophets is prophecy in the New Testament terminology. It can be not necessarily a prediction, but a proclamation from Yahweh. So it's roughly equivalent to what we might think of as preaching. And teachers is what I'm doing now. Now, the teaching is for edifying, and it's incumbent for the converted as well as the unconverted. Now, evangelism and edification are the two designs for which the assembly individually and universally are oriented towards. So we are to enhance our knowledge of theology and enhance the brethren through teaching. And miracles, healings, and helps, I already mentioned. Miracles and healings really need no introduction. They are very real possibilities. There have been various people who have had the magic touch of sorts. The saints throughout the ages who are able to perform healings inexplicably without medical training. And tongues is at the bottom of the list, but it's as it was more functionally essential in the primitive assembly because it was from its inception pan-national. So at Pentecost, the inauguration of the assembly, we witnessed the speaking of tongues, and this was enabled to the various ethnicities in the crowd are alluded to in Acts 2, 9, and 11. They were all able to be touched because Elohim wants to speak to us in manners that are comprehensible to us. And it's not practiced by the majority of conventional Christians with the exception of the Pentecostals. But it's not entirely obsolete, but it's no longer functionally necessary in the age of the Rosetta Stone. Are all apostles, are all prophets, are all teachers, are all workers of miracles? This is a rhetorical question because not everyone can claim the superabundance of gifts, let alone exercise them. Do all have gifts of healing? Do all speak with tongues? Do all interpret? But earnestly seek the better gifts, and yet I show you a more excellent way. So we have the priorities of the gifts, and we are to seek the best gifts